did you first grow curious about the paranormal? Dare you dig deeper? You are listening to House of Asher.
Hey everybody, welcome back to House of Asher. I'm your host Steve Asher, and it's a moderately gloomy Saturday morning, but it's no snow or ice, so I'll take it. Just sitting here in my little studio here in Western Kentucky, listening to the wildlife and the trains and all the trappings of a rural existence here in the end of the most midwestern side of Kentucky. This is episode 76, and what I want to touch on is something that's a little bit different, but I think it's pretty cool. I think it's one that I don't get to have discussion on a whole lot, because generally I can't get people that are super versed in it and truly experience some of this stuff. And that's one of the things that I'm very honored to be able to say that we can do today. And my guest today is Miss Solaris BlueRaven, and I will give you a quick rundown on her bio real quick. Miss BlueRaven is a published author, timeline astrologer, healer, and mystical scientist with a professional background in decoding covert warfare programs and technology associated with synthetic telepathy and artificial intelligence related projects. Almost got it out. Now, for more information, you can check out her website, which we will discuss again later in the show, Night Shadow Anomaly Detectives. And make sure to tune into her show, Hyperspace, on KCOR Digital Radio Network every Friday at 12 midnight. It's Eastern and 9 Pacific time, and her books are available for purchase through Amazon and any reputable dealers, Walmart, all that. And if I believe the most recent book is 1 Million Miles Till Midnight. And I mean, this lady has done all kinds of stuff, test pilots for covert technologies, also have a background in surveillance, so much stuff. And I could talk about it, or I could just introduce the lady. Solaris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
It's awesome, and it's and like I said, I know you have other engagements that you got to get to, so I'll try not to keep you too long. But it's funny. I know that we both have a mutual interest in the writer Philip K. Dick, and how that kind of ties in with alternate realities and all kinds of stuff, which can get really, really deep. Because if you look at different things through different lenses, you see things that maybe go, well, it's just science fiction, but it's like, is it? So can you explain a little bit about, for people who may not be as familiar with you as I am in this area, how this all started for you? I know that you had different situations come to you and more or less imprinted on you in a way. Did this happen when you were very young, or was this when you were older?
Okay. Well, when I was young, I was just very, very sensitive and very psychic insofar as abilities go. I was a natural psychic, even though I didn't know the terminology. Back then, it was just natural consciousness and motion, and being very ethereal when it came down to assessing my environment. It seemed like I always had a database that was very advanced, even as a kid. So to me, it just seemed like my flow of consciousness was in tune with what I call the multidimensional fields. When it came down to the covert technology, I was pulled into that particular warfare program in 2004 when I was extracted in my home with a technological interface that literally was a signal interface onto my brainwave activity, which opened up a communication system light beat real time with synthetic telepathy and my handler. And that was a whole different ballpark. That was a whole different arena. And that was actually when I say I'm a test pilot, because I was one of the initial people who was literally a test pilot for this type of a warfare program, where they ran me through a battery of programs, including Sci-Spy and a lot of other technologies, and also their way to do threat assessment, psychological warfare, pushing boundaries like you wouldn't believe. So I can go into that later, but that's a rundown insofar as how I got involved with this. And then I started talking to Tessa Dick, because I was very much into Phil K. Dick, and I recognized the signature of the technology in his work, especially in the Scanner Darkly and THX, not that one, it was the other one I was thinking of, Duandra's Dream of Electric Sheep, that's the one, Blade Runner. That's right. Definitely involved with a technology interface and a lot of the types of things they were working with. So I did see a signature there, and she kind of confirmed that he was being, gaslighted and gang stalked and tracked by covert intelligence department. So it was interesting to watch this go right out, just kind of play out the way it did.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Blade Runner. It's probably one of my favorite all-time movies. And I don't know. It does seem that certain people, which I think all artists do this, and I use that on myself with a small a, it's a thing where a lot of times you interject whatever your experience is, your fears, your prejudices. Sometime, I mean, look at guys like Lovecraft. You know, all the kind of xenophobic qualities of a lot of his work. But it does seem that sometimes you can look at people and look at their work and kind of go, yeah, it seems like he's kind of clued in a little bit. Either someone's feeding him like a little information mixed in with just enough disinformation to not be right on. And, you know, what's the old thing? I forgot the biblical term. I think it was like pearls before swine. And it's one of these things that those that know will see, and those that don't will continue on. You know, and
correct.
It's stuff gets coded through films and music and a lot of this. Now, I knew you'd mentioned earlier on, and I don't know if we really had discussed this before, because I was lucky enough to be on your show a few times. Which also you have Witching Hour. I should have mentioned that earlier. I apologize.
Yeah, and you'll be back too. By the way, you're an awesome guest.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Pleasure
that.
to have you on my show. Yeah.
Well, it's always a pleasure. But something I was going to ask too. How much of this did you think ties in with? Because I know you do work regards of like DNA activation. Was this a bloodline thing? Did you have, you know? Because I know you are a practitioner, you know, of the art. So, was your family also kind of like that, or was it more like it was there but they didn't really tap into it?
I think it was there and they didn't really access it. And one thing I think I might have mentioned, maybe you overheard it or at some point, but my family on my mother's side, they were involved in the Scottish Rite Masons, high-ranking Masons, and Eastern Stars. So there was a lot of that spirituality in the house, and also mystical teachings. Even though when I grew older, I just started going on my own path of consciousness and received initiation and started diving into mystical alchemy and the craft and all kinds of things, and including DNA activation with Ascension. I do think that because of my frequency and the level of consciousness I was at, that was an appeal to them when they interconnected me with the technology, because it was pure energy, pure light. I didn't have any baggage at the time. I didn't have anything holding me in limitation or any psychological issues or anything that would be a shadow in the program. To them, it would have been a really nice line of communication. And I believe that's one of the reasons I was a good target for that. And also, I talk about my universal celestial heartbeat and pulse, which is literally a Merkaba signal that you establish through light body levels of consciousness and frequency to a level where you actually become the vehicle of light, where you actually have a universal celestial heartbeat and pulse, which is you can actually feel this energetic signature inside your body. And that's not the technology I was interfaced with. That's my initial signal. So that signal, I think, was an appeal to them. And also, they wanted to know more about that particular signal.
Well, it seems like that, because we've talked a little bit about, you know, our personal journeys, and, you know, where, like, you came from a certain spot, and through basically experimentation and manipulation, you were kind of in the batting cage for a minute, but then you kind of took control of the situation, and then you started kind of, you know, driving the bus with it. You know, as we'd mentioned before, actually on your show, you know, myself in learning this stuff and going through and reading and taking what feels right and what feels wholesome, not necessarily in a moral, spiritual standpoint, but just that feels will feed the soul, and that which will be detrimental. And so I try to kind of toss that off, you know. And it's been a weird, strange journey. And as you know, for your own thing, coming into that, you know, I guarantee you never expected to be where you are now, because I mean, I know before you had a pretty normal life, you know. I believe you and your ex-husband did excavating and this and that, and
yeah, he was a surveyor. He owned his own surveying company. I was a surveyor with him. I was a map maker, actually. I did topographic maps, and I was his field person, and we had we worked together in the business. And then I did my own work. I was a writer and also did healing work on the side and taught martial arts. So yeah, we had a normal, productive life. And it was very strange to get ripped away from that and completely resurrected into something digitized and what I call the transhumanism program on steroids. So yeah, it's very different.
Well, you know, and there's so much of that when you're talking about the transhumanism thing. There's so much of it in media. I mean, you almost have to willfully not see it, and you almost have, you know, because there definitely are. And I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, which they're not always wrong, but there's obviously certain agendas to promote this and that, and to demonize this and to glorify this, and And it's like in every program, it's in every this and that. It's in the music, it's in the tempos, in the beats per minute. It's like you said, it's energetic, it's electrical, and it's spiritual. That's something that's always seemed true to me, that there's that thing in you. Like, I forgot, do you play music?
I do. I played the flute when I was young. I play keyboards by ear. I'm okay with drums, but yeah, I'm a musician. But I just don't play. I'm a musician for myself.
Right.
At this point, yeah.
For the love of it. Something I was going to ask you, and we'll get a little bit back more into some of your experiences. I know, as coming up, doing what I did and playing music and punk bands and this and that, but whenever, especially the more comfortable I become, I didn't feel really, this is sound really nutty, I didn't really exactly feel there. A lot of times when I would be playing, my concentration would be to the sky or to the ceiling, almost like you're looking out through the ceiling, like you're connecting with something. And I'm not trying to sound like Santana or something, which I get that. I never quite understood it until, I got to a certain point. You're sitting and you're playing your stuff, and after your show, I don't half remember a lot of it. And in a good way. It was almost like getting into a chant, into a certain modality of your brain. The right and left brains kind of switch, and you connect with something bigger than us. And
yeah, it's like the higher level of consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people have a hard time dealing with it. I guarantee people in your situation, because I know a lot of musicians who maybe could do that, but then compared their home life was so boring and so mundane that they have drinking problems and drug problems, and marriages fall apart and stuff. How many people, if I can ask without giving any names, are you familiar with other people that have been kind of in this type of situation? Do you have like a little network? Do you guys communicate as almost like a help group, or is it more or less everybody's walking this alone and trying to find their own footing?
Excuse me, that's a good question. My particular experience, mine was kind of solo insofar as the way I was inducted and the people involved. So it was a very unique case with high-profile musicians in the entertainment industry called, obviously Rush. But I don't know anybody who was in that similar program. I do know that there are people out there who are targeted individuals, and everybody's having exotic experiences. So I think they're all on their separate journey trying to figure out what's going on. But there are support groups. Misha Johnson does a support group for targeted individuals, and people have been through kind of an MK Ultra oriented program. So there is that kind of thing happening, but it's very difficult to kind of talk and brainstorm because everybody has their own information. And what I don't want to do is muddy the waters. I have articulate data. I have a real case and I have real information. I don't want to get it contaminated by everybody else's information. So I just keep it the way it is as the benchmark, and then whatever I learn down the road is fine. But that's where I'm at with it.
Well, and also it's kind of, like I've told you before about just, having toxic people in your life. And, like my home, I have to keep it pure. I have to keep the water clean. And you don't always know people's motivation. You don't know if they are there to derail what you got going on. You don't know if they're there to watch what you got going on and report back to somebody. It's really hard to tell. And like you said, dealing with handlers and all that, that all kind of takes me back to what we lost President Bush not real long ago, and supposed connections to early CIA programming and JFK stuff. And I won't get off into that because I don't want to speak ill of the dead. But it does seem like it can go really, really dark really fast. And
yeah, it does.
Yeah. So
it's the mind control. It's the psychological warfare. And we can go into that too, but that's an insidious warfare program. And where I've been, it's so insidious that it's concerning that they're deploying this and they're getting away with it. And that's one of the reasons I communicated the truth and I stood up and I testified in the courtroom, because I wanted people to know what was going on. Because the technology, I don't have a problem with technology. I have a problem with the misuse of it and the people that are getting away with these insidious projects. So it does need to be looked at.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's basically they do what they want. They're in. So then you have no counterbalance or check weights for it, and it can kind of run amok. Any program that isn't not necessarily open to the public, but you know what I'm saying, that has the checks and balances. Right.
Yeah.
They're going to run and do whatever they want and grow to whatever extreme. Before we kind of touch in like some of your connections with Rush and all that, you hear about like breakaway civilizations. You hear about, which I honestly wonder if so much of breakaway civilization, or if it's a parallel Earth or a different vibrational Earth that maybe has the ability to come through here to another location or whatever. But so I don't know how much of it is necessarily aliens or future humans or whatever will be humans in a millennia, if anything. I always think it's kind of it's a little bit of hubris to kind of go, well, of course we're going to be Star Trek in 1,000 years, or we're going to be, there's no guarantee of that. So.
Well, I can tell you one thing. There is the corporate agenda, which is connected to big machines like Google and some other people who have their private enterprise who are literally involved in this big time. This technology I've been interfaced with, they're going full speed ahead with it, and they also are, in my opinion, the breakaway society. I think that this is going to be the breakaway with the technology, and they're going to take their percentage of people and probably try to do something exotic off planet. That's just my own perception, just because of where I've been with the technology. And if you look on the internet right now, you're going to see all kinds of stuff on synthetic telepathy, psychotronics, especially synthetic telepathy, and the AI is a big deal. And this is every single thing that I've been interfaced with starting in 2004, which nobody talked about when I testified. Everybody was making a mockery of my case, and now all of a sudden everybody's talking about it, and they're ignoring my case from 2004. So I find it very interesting, but that's the breakaway I see. And you're right about the frequencies, because each dimensional field is defined by frequency. So we do have another aspect of this world in another dimensional field, depending on what level of vibration we're at. But at this point in the continuum, what I've seen is that they have a lot of structuring going on where they're creating frequency fences. They don't want people ascending to higher levels of consciousness, or they're trying to run an interference pattern, or you have to be absorbed into their program or their hive in order to go to the next level. So this is the controlling game board that I'm seeing, and it's mostly digitized, and it's connected to these big corporations, these big corporations that are running the show.
Well, I've seen a sort of a breakaway in regards, which I'm 49 now, so I'm going to sound, this is my old man moment, but even in dealing
please.
with, well, you know what I'm saying though, but okay, but back me on this,
Okay.
even dealing with younger people at this point, I can't do PS4, I can't do, there's certain things that's just like, it's my brain malleability is not that, I think these kids' minds have been kind of hardwired and rewired through the sort of symbiotic relationship with machines. You know how it was growing up, through the 70s and stuff like that, man. If you had to make a phone call, you stopped at a pay phone or whatever. We were not as endeared to the machine as we are now. It really is
Right.
a secondary or an extended arm or extended this and that. So, it's, to me, it's already kind of
But you also
happening.
used your natural psychic ability back then. Yeah, no, I agree with you. But you also used your psychic ability back then, just like I did. We didn't use the technology, but we are the technology to some degree, because our supercomputer brains were running really, actually very streamlined. And you can remember times when you've had premonitions, or you felt somebody was going to call before they did. That's your extension of consciousness working right there. So it's just been kind of delegated into the technology. But I agree with you. The kids in the younger generations, they're calibrated to the technology itself. Yeah, absolutely. Even in the womb. There's no way around it.
Right. I've even heard talks of them wanting to do stuff in the womb, make certain connections. And, it goes way beyond, the bank chip or something for you to go through and, not have to carry money on you or whatnot. But it really seems, I don't say a Borg-esque type thing, but there's elements of that. It's very Matrixy.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is the Matrix. You're right. Mm-hmm.
And so it I don't know, maybe it's just that I've had enough life, before AI type thing to kind of go, yeah, that's not really normal. This isn't normal. And
it's a derailment. It's actually a derailment to who we are as real ascended beings. But it is an interesting program. And like I said, when I was first plugged into it, it was so quick and so fast. I thought it was really interesting. Actually, I thought it was kind of cool. But at the same time, when the interrogation program ran and all these other things, it wasn't cool. So they use it for positive or negative, depending on what they want to do. But one thing I can tell you, when you get interconnected, they want full control over you. And if you establish your own control mechanism, they'll find a way to bring you down, because they don't want you independent in that hive. No way. You've got to be part of it. You've got to be synced with it. And if you're not part of it, they'll make you miserable. So.
Right. They'll push you out of the hive, as it were. Well, and it was something I was going to say, and then you just said something that even validated it more for me, is that you were like, oh, when I come into it, it was sort of like flume, and it was sort of like there it was. That tells me they've been working and tweaking in this for probably generations, if not longer. And I almost guarantee that this is rediscovered information. I mean, if you go way back, I'm talking, in the supposed Atlantean and pre-Atlantean world, I'm sure they probably had something like this. It may not have been as intrusive as what we have now, because I think sometimes, how do I word this? Because I try not to come off sound because I'm really not religious, but there's certain words that come to me, and it just seems like the soul of things are different now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
It's almost like it's been hijacked, and they've created a dim copy of that true light body Merkaba, what I was discussing earlier. So yeah, I agree with that. It's been a hijacking of the spiritual realms, or also the consciousness, and the reverse engineered technology too. I see the reverse engineered technology as well.
Yeah, and which that makes you wonder too, if all life is connected into the same sort of. I mean, obviously, anything with a life force is connected to the same stream of consciousness and energy at some level, but I wonder how many of these other life forms, like say the Greys or whatnot, which you always hear a lot of people say, well, they're a biomechanical being. Maybe that's something like they're trying to do, but it's run amok to the point where it's got zero soul and it's completely integrated without much.
Right? Yeah.
So, well, let me ask you. Now, we had talked about a little bit about Rush and that, and you having a handler. For those that aren't as familiar with the story as I am, you had, which, I mean, you're a writer, a lyricist as well, and people had compared some of your works to some of Neil Peart's, and which Rush pre-Neil Peart was a different animal. The sound, the feeling of it, it's almost like. It's almost just like they were taken over, and they followed this guy. He was kind of their guru, their inspiration, their lyricist, and all this. And he really elevated the music. And that's the thing. That's what I have this kind of duality of. I grew up on Rush, especially stuff like Moving Pictures and songs like Witch Hunt and stuff like that, and XYZ and stuff. That's always been a big part of my childhood. Which it's. Western Kentucky in the 70s, man, you're going to have REO Speedwagon, you're going to have Rush, you're going to have Skinner, you're going to have Black Oak, Arkansas. But it always seemed like you said, their music was a little bit different. Are there other bands, before we get really into what happened there, are there any other bands that you feel are connected like that? Because I always wondered, it always struck me that like bands like Black Sabbath was kind of like that, especially on the esoteric subjects of Geezer Butler and the way he really studied, which he never said he was a practitioner, he never said this and that, but it's just it always smelt like that to me. And I know I use that terminology with you and you get it. I go a lot with my gut, and I go a lot with this is what it feels to me, and if I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like certain bands like that. Are there other bands that either consciously or by manipulation are in a similar situation with Rush in regards of connecting with people like that?
I can't prove it, but what I would say, the one that really stands out is U2, the band. Bono, for sure. Those people stand out insofar as the manipulation goes. Pink Floyd also, David Gilmour, they know about the technology. I'm not sure if they're deploying it, but they certainly know about it. And if you listen to their lyrics, it indicates an awful lot. Sure, part of it sounds like drugs and doing this and that, but when you go deeper into the levels of this technology, you're gonna understand when you start listening to their lyrics what they're really talking about. So I'd say those people stand out big time. Besides the band themselves, and I agree with you about the early days of Rush. They were very different until Neil Peart showed up, and that's why I find it very interesting that people used to think I wrote like Peart, because that was strange, because he did change the whole dynamic. But he was also involved in those programs, and it shows in his lyrics. I mean, if you look back at all those really interesting lyrics that we were very much gravitating to, he was talking about the technology, he was talking about the signals, moving pictures. That's what I was doing with the interface, live feed real time with. I mean, this whole technology is built into what he was talking about for a long, long time. And it's interesting to me. I don't know how many people they've pulled into these projects that are alive that have maybe been working for them. I'm not sure. But I do know that the surveillance and security and Mossbox area of Ashclan was primarily involved in that. And he has his hands in a lot of different people in the music industry out in California. So I would suggest that whoever he has as a contact or a client is definitely involved. I look at Madonna. She has access to certain technologies, in my opinion, that could use the illegal surveilling and gaslighting on a target. There's so many people, Lady Goo Goo, I call her, Lady, what you would call her. I mean, these people can definitely get the access. And that's why I'm very concerned, because it's being used and weaponized to really become more manipulative and to kind of discredit or harm the target versus enlightening people. So you got to be careful with it. It's a toy right now to them. It's a rich person's toy.
Well, let me ask you this. Syd Barrett, you're discussing Pink Floyd. Do you know anything? I've heard different stuff. I've heard, well, man, he just too many drops of the bad acid, brown acid or something. And then, but I've also heard, and it feels right more for some reason, and I have absolutely no way to substantiate it. I'm just going on what my gut's telling me. Was he experimented on similarly? And do you think that with the non-corporeal voices and the things that were coming to him and the information played a hand in his kind of descent into madness?
Right. That's a great question too. It's my opinion that these people have been experimented on. I believe that they were extracted into the high-profile positions they had to be an influence on the mass collective, and I believe that they were controlled and handled. And I can pretty much prove that to some degree. I mean, if you look at these people and you kind of see where they're at with their hearing quote-unquote voices, that takes the whole dynamic away from people who are crazy versus a mock communication system. And once people realize that this is a technological stream interface, it takes the psychosis out of it. These people aren't crazy; they're interfaced, and it changes the whole dynamic. So I would say that's a high possibility. And whenever the Queen gets involved, I know she's knighted. Is it David Gilmour who's a knight? Anytime you get knighted by the Queen, in my opinion, you're pulled into the program. You are part of it. You're part of the hive. And this has been an old secret that I feel was never really released to the mass collective. I don't think they wanted it insofar as being out there because it's used for surveillance and security so well, and it's encrypted, and people can really pull off a high clearance security communication system, and nobody will know the better. So I feel like it was blocked for various reasons, but that's my take on it. There was an interview with Pert. I mentioned this before years ago. It was I think it was in the 90s. I can't remember now, where he told the masses. I mean, he was in an interview and he said he was schizophrenic. Well, he wasn't schizophrenic. He's been interfaced with technology. He's been part of that program for a very long time. But he masks it and he pretends and he covers it up, and he's still doing it today. And I swear to you, I get so frustrated because I wanted these guys to just come out and say it. Just communicate the truth, bite the bullet, for crying out loud. But it's never going to happen. So say la vie. But go ahead.
No, I was just saying. No, preach, sister. I was just saying, when you look at stuff, and like I said, we're talking about going back. I'm going back for a minute, and I'm going to touch on the whole Paul's dead thing. I know I'm beating a dead horse, but my thing was, I never took it as that he physically died. I think that he possibly, and then because they say, well, he seems so different. Even his expressions are different. You know something about possession, and you know something about when people are taken over, and when people are sharing the same locality with something. You're not the same person. So your body posture, your demeanor, your expressions, your reactions, all that can change on a dime. And I wonder how much of that, because obviously, I mean, there was a huge change from like the Love Me Do stuff to jumping off into Sgt. Pepper's and Rubber Soul and all that stuff, and really getting off into some trippy stuff, and all the symbolism, they have like Crowley on their album covers and all these different people. A very obvious nod to mysticism and different experimentation. It wouldn't surprise me if something like that had happened. And but
right, yeah. I agree. Go ahead.
But when you bring that to the forefront, the first thing people go is like, "Oh, come on, man," or like, "Okay, no, you drank the Kool-Aid, man. You went too far." And I'm like, "No, look, I'm still the same guy. This and that, but I've always been curious, and I'm going to ask the questions, because it's when people react really hardcore against it, unless it's just something horrifically stupid or vulgar, you have to kind of go, why is it hitting you like that? If you're much ado about nothing, that you're, don't look over there, don't look over here, and
hear something, yeah.
Right, and it's...
Well, also, those are reanimation programs, what you're describing. Yeah, there's the regular possession, quote-unquote possession, there's the electronic possession, the synthetic telepathy interface, and the cloning. And what you're describing, even with the Beatles, is literally a synthetic alter being interfaced onto the target. And they can do that through EEG cloning and heterodyning, by the way, through a signal overlay. It's not hard to do. And so they could literally do that and create his personality, a change in his personality, and a new identity, and nobody would ever know. And the old identity would die, and the new host program would take over. That's highly possible. I think that's what they did to me, to be honest with you. They kept trying to change my name in 2004, and they kept doing all kinds of interrogation and stuff on to me with a narrative. But I held my ground. But I still remember so much interface. I was literally almost catatonic when my husband, there was a time when he grabbed me and looked at me and was trying to talk to me, and I was gone. I wasn't even there because I was being interfaced, and it was just like this jamming transmission. So I can tell you anything is possible with this technology, and that's why I say you have to be very, very true to yourself at the higher self, oversoul, superconscious, and in my opinion, very anchored in what I call, creator, source, highest form, whatever you believe in, and really hold your ground unless you want to be consumed by it, because that's what they're after, is a synthetic alter interface to create. It seems to me like they want to create these alters to create an agenda for them or to do something. You're working for them when they start doing these programs. So that's a technology you can prove, by the way. This isn't even hocus pocus. This is like we can look for these patents and you can see that this has been a technology.
Right. Well, again, I'm like a very big sci-fi nut and this and that. And I was thinking about, of all the kind of films that are hokey, and like in the best way, Plan 9. And because you were thinking about the reanimation of the dead's minds through electrical stimulation. It's not we're stitching them together and hitting them with lightning, but we're using an electronic beam, an invisible beam, to manipulate a mind that has basically been wiped. And so I don't know. I mean, this sort of stuff could have went back a long time, at least in the form as we know it. But
right.
So let me ask you, touch on a little bit of the thing with Russia if you want to. If not, we can discuss another subject. But I was kind of curious, how that all went down, kind of what the aftermath has been, and how are you now? I mean, obviously you're still trying to recover, your electromagnetic fields and bioelectric fields and stuff. But touch on that a little bit, because a lot of people that listen to my show probably are unaware of this.
Right, and you can actually follow my book series either remote, and you can also watch my documentary for people who are kind of lost in this. But initially, it was started in 2004 after I sent my book, which was Transmutation Through Ascension, to Neil Peart, because one of my kickboxing students who I was in my class had mentioned something about him losing his family. And let me back up the truck also. I always like to let people know why and how I got involved with this. In the 90s and in the early 80s, people used to say I wrote like him. In the 80s especially, they say, well, you write like Neil Peart. And I didn't know who he was. So I started listening to the Rush albums, and then, of course, I started recognizing the lyrics, like, yeah, that does sound kind of like something I would write. And at one point, he had a drum solo contest, and I sent some of my poetry in to the drum solo contest in this little microset recorder. I kind of snuck it in and said, read the note, and I put my poetry in there. So I wasn't actually signing in for the contest insofar as being a drummer, but a poet. So anyways, I did send that in, and that established a communication with Peart. He did respond. He sent me a postcard. It was handwritten. And then between that point in the 80s and up until the 90s, he would always send me a postcard. If I sent him anything, he'd send me one back. So it was ebb and flow. It wasn't a groupie fan situation. It wasn't weird. It was just kind of normal, like me, kind of. I wouldn't even say I looked up to him. I guess I felt comfortable in communication with him.
Probably
so
had
I
that connection.
Stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, I just didn't feel like, I felt like it was a good ebb and flow. I never really got a bad vibe off the situation. And everybody thought it was really cool that I was getting postcards from this guy. So I kept the communication and up until like the 90s. And then I just started moving on in consciousness and going to higher levels, and I stopped communicating with him. I really didn't send him any postcards myself, because I used to send like little cards to his, in the mail to him here and there. But I stopped kind of communicating with him in the 90s and just kind of progressed in my own level of consciousness. And it wasn't until 2004 until I sent that book that this stuff started happening. So when I did send my book, I sent it over to Rick Van Horn, who was the guy I've always sent my information to Peart to. He's kind of like the middleman in New Jersey, and he's the managing editor for Modern Drummer magazine. And that's where I send that, and then, of course, Peart would respond indirectly, but directly, because it's like a filter. So anyways, I sent it over there, and then within a week's time, I had all kinds of strange going on in the house. We had the computer seemed like they were being keylogged and hijacked. We had the phone was, my cell phone was being compromised. People were calling my phone, and I didn't know who they were. They were kind of like a cryptic, kind of strange, asking for certain things. I had physical plants that were showing up in the area. It was starting to get very strange, like they were closing in on me or doing a surveilling on me. And then the serious part of it was I was interconnected with the communication system Live Feed Real Time, where they opened up a communication system with a handler. And the handler was Michael J. Mosbach with Neil Peart, Alex Lifeson, and Geddy Lee, Live Feed Real Time. And everybody might say, well, excuse me, wasn't this an imposter? No, it wasn't an imposter. It was actually them interfacing me Live Feed Real Time. But Michael also running the show with the technology. They announced who they were. Michael J. Mosbach told me who he was before I even met him in person. I had no idea who that person was. He said, I'm Michael J. Mosbach. And I thought, well, I'll remember that name. But what's strange is I never knew that name until they told me Life Feed Real Time in the communication system, and then I met him in person. So when I was being interfaced with the technology in 2004, let me explain how they do this. They triangulate you in your home, inside your residence, with a signal interface. Literally, they just triangulate you. They map your electromagnetic field, your neural circuitry, your vitals. They interface you with a signal, and they just open up the communication system. And when that happens, you go into a state of trauma. Your body gets kind of like into a shock. It shocks the system, literally, because it's not used to being intruded upon by an exterior signal. This is like a directed energy weapon. So it literally kind of took everything down, and then I had to kind of rewire going up. And when I was being rewired, it seemed like they were using their musical instruments, their keyboards, their guitars, their drums, and all kinds of music to kind of recreate a signal, which they used in my chest cavity, which bounced to music on the radio and did all sorts of really strange things. And I know this sounds really bizarre, but this is exactly what they did. So when I was literally getting pulled into this program, I wasn't in communication with my husband. I wasn't really talking to him. I was in trauma, and he didn't understand what was happening. He thought I was being drugged. He was going to call my doctor. He said, something's wrong. She's not acting right. And of course, we don't do drugs or alcohol. I mean, once in a while, I think I've mentioned this before, we do maybe a beer after a road race or something. We were both athletes and martial artists. We didn't do anything weird. So when I got hit with this, it was very, very, very strange that my behavior changed to be almost catatonic. And the only time I was in communication was Live Feed Real Time with synthetic telepathy. So that was a big problem. And after that, when I was hit with the program, he said, go to a place of your choosing where I can get to you. And at that point, I went to Maui. Don't ask me why. I just literally went to Maui, and within 4 months' time, I was divorced, and Mosbach showed up. So this is what I mean by the program itself and how it operates. But I will tell you, it was really strange to watch the gaslighting and the plants around in the local area. I had a guy named Dave Hart who was over across the street where I lived, and I lived in a very nice neighborhood. I mean, this is a very nice area. There was a storage facility, a really nice place over where you could store your stuff, and he was over there. And when I was putting my stuff in storage, when I was trying to get on a plane, he came over to me, hands me an apple and a CD, and says, be careful what you listen to. I mean, the whole thing was a setup and premeditated, bottom line. So that's how that started. It got worse insofar as the communication system goes, and you can chime in anytime you want to. I hope this isn't sounding like I'm going in too many different directions. Do you have any questions so far?
No, I was just saying that's hella strange. You know, somebody just...
Oh, it's bizarre. I mean, literally, it's when you're in your own thoughts, that's one thing, but when people invade your mind with a signal and do this kind of a thing to you, it's traumatizing like you wouldn't believe. And it's not just about traumatizing with... You know? Yeah, it is. And it's not just about traumatizing with the brain. It's literally the narrative. They hijack your psychic center, so they're forcing you with visuals. They're doing all kinds of strange things. But what I will say is that I'm a natural remote viewer, so I was able to remote view also an interface, and I actually did get to see everybody live feed real time and work the program very, very well until they started running a psychotronic program, and they tried to run interference. I think they were getting nervous because I was able to push back pretty good and was very, very strong. They didn't realize how powerful I was. But that whole communication system that they put into my chest cavity, you know, it's interesting because if you look at the R30 tour and the contents under pressure, that year, all of that data was written in interconnection with me, live feed real time. The snakes and arrows was written in interconnection with me, live feed real time. When he says brought to you by conniption, that's me. That's actually the interface, him and I, live feed real time with the communication system, because when he first pulled me into the program, he goes, I'm going to have a conniption fit. And literally, it was interesting, and I don't tell anybody this. I think you're the first person I've ever said this to. There's certain words that they said, live feed, that showed up right there. Also, the Rhythm and Light book that Carrie Nutcase, I call her Nutcase Nuttall, who's married to Pert, she's the handler also and part of these programs. She wrote a book called Rhythm and Light in mockery of what they did to me. So literally gaslighting that whole communication system. It's like virtual pig's blood, but she wrote a book in mockery of the interconnection program he did to me and the stuff they did with the signals in my chest cavity. So not only were they interconnected and doing this live feed real time, they were making a mockery of it and writing books and literally entertaining themselves on tour in the 2004, going with the Snakes and Arrows. And then, of course, the Feedback album. If anybody pays attention to Feedback, that's another one that they put out the same time I was inducted into the covert program. So all of these things they started to do and calibrating me for the technology. Then I went out to Maui, and of course, Michael kept calling my phone, Michael J. Mosbach, and I was like, I didn't know who he was. I was so traumatized, and I was so not in my body. He kept saying, call me, it's Michael, call me, it's Michael. Well, I didn't know who he was. I mean, this is where I was at, consciousness-wise. And then I realized it was Michael J. Mosbach later on. So all of these things started to correlate insofar as him being the handler and them being there interfacing live feed real time when they needed to be, and also being interfaced with music. And then through that duration, when I was on Maui, with like 2004 to 2005, 2006, they pulled me into surveillance and security work, which was, I think I mentioned this to you, I started getting involved in that work only because of Michael, because that's his background. It wasn't something I wanted to do. I was a surveyor. So I was on autopilot for the most part, but I started getting calibrated to do that kind of a work. And I did pretty well, actually. I was doing really great, but I was also being sci-spied insofar as I was live feed real-time communication system and also doing the work in the linear world. And nobody knew the better. But I do believe the guy who was head of the company did know what was going on, because he called me one day and he said to me, he's really encrypted. He goes, I see a star shining over your house. And I was just like, I didn't quite understand what he was talking about. But I know that I was being monitored, and I know that I was being observed as a test pilot and also as a test subject, because DC was getting involved in contacting my employer on Maui and doing a check to see what was going on. They were almost shadowing the event. And that was very interesting how that was rolling out. And that was confirmed with the woman who was running the desk when I showed up for work one day, and she said, Solaris, the White House. And I was like, what? Because they were literally calling my boss. And then like a few days later, there was a break into the facility, and all the files were stolen, all the personnel files, and mine was part of that. I don't know where that was. This is like crazy stuff that happened. I can go on and on about all the events that happened. But anyways, to kind of go fast forward a little bit here, I stayed in communication with Michael J. Mosbach, and he was on the phone with me on and off for months at a time on Maui. It got to the point where I was so disoriented and so tired of being on Maui that I wanted to go back to Colorado, because that felt like home to me. So I called him and I said, Michael, I don't know what to do anymore. I think I want to go back to Colorado. And he got really quiet. And he said, come to LA. Well, I didn't go to LA. I just ignored that program, and I went to Colorado. And that's when he came out here, excuse me, and then he showed up with Geddy Lee's family member and another guy and said, how would you like to talk to a magistrate? And I said, well, if I talk to a magistrate, I'm going to need somebody in my corner. And he said, well, don't worry, I'll be there for you. Well, he lied about that. He wasn't there to be there for me. He was there to set me up in the courtroom, which he did very, very well. So he set me up. He hands me a temporary restraining order and says, he just hands me, he said, I'm in your head. And I looked at the restraining order. I said, well, you're setting me up. I'm not going to sign this. And he goes, have a nice day. And he gets up and he walks away with the other two members. And what's interesting is that I was standing on this property. I was renting a room out of it. And I called him from my phone. And he literally used that as a violation of a temporary restraining order and had me taken to jail when I testified in the courtroom. Yeah, this guy set me up like you wouldn't believe. I mean, you're ex-law enforcement. I think you might get this, but some people don't. And let me ask you something. When somebody gives you a restraining order with their name on it, do they hand it to you in person? Don't they send a law enforcement officer to do that, or somebody else?
Usually it's served by a sheriff or a lawyer or something. Because, they could say, oh, well, of course I gave it to him. This person is under oath and liable, so if that person goes,
right,
here's the information. And sometimes they'll even have a person off scene, maybe take a photo, or they'll have the person wired, so it's like, here's the paper, what's this?
Mm-hmm.
Here it is in your hand, I'm leaving.
It's so strange.
Nah, that's weird.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what he did insofar as setting me up, and then actually basically inducting me into the program, and then saying, well, how do you want to talk to a magistrate? I said yes, and then tells me, well, that we can go ahead and do it this way, but I'm in your head, gives me that paper, and all this other garbage that goes along with it. It's just such a madhouse when it comes down to it. But I did go in and I did testify, and of course, he lied under oath. I saw him literally lying about everything in the technology. He goes, oh, she's talking mind control and all kinds of other things. And of course, the judge, I don't think, had a clue, quite honestly. I think he was completely not only paid off, but didn't have a clue what we were talking about, and kind of like a third party, kind of lost. So he pretty much dismissed the case and ignored it. But I did have my ex-NSA Signals Intelligence lawyer, who was a federal lawyer, shadowing the case. And I know that had he been there the day that I was having to testify, that Michael probably would have gone to jail, or at least been penalized to some degree. And of course, I wasn't able to get my lawyer in there the same day. But the whole idea about getting me to testify was literally so he could set me up in the courtroom. It wasn't about doing anything on my behalf. So it did get ugly, and they put a temporary restraining order on me to kind of keep that distance going on. But the whole time they're interfacing me with a torture program and a lot of other psychotronic weapons. That's what cracks me up. It was him that was perpetrating the crime. But when I countered it, he got all upset with me. And then, of course, they started running this program instead. So after that, I started writing my book, Series Eye of the Remote, Black Operations Near Eastbound 52, and I documented as best I could the whole event itself. I started putting out a documentary. I started measuring the signals that were registering in me. I went to Steve Colburn, and he measured all these signals and showed very, very clearly what they were doing to me and all the technological stuff that was going on with me, so that was, that you could literally prove that this stuff is real. And after that, I put some other books out, and I kept my radio shows going and doing interviews. And I just kept calibrating with the technology. I never stopped fighting insofar as exposing the misuse of covert warfare. And these guys are responsible and are accountable, but it's never going to be resolved. And I just have to come to terms with that unless we get somebody who's just really willing to go after them. And I honestly don't know if that's ever going to happen, because this is a deep program where these guys have a lot of accountability, but you're seeing where they're doing the soft disclosure now with synthetic telepathy and psychotronics. So everybody and their mother's so used to this program now that they're not going to think it's anything major, but it is something major. So today where it stands is that I've calibrated a lot of the technology, and about 4 to 5 years ago, after Pert retired, they started running a different kind of neurolinguistic, which used to hit me in the back of the head with a signal, and that kind of interfered with my speech pattern. It kind of interfered with my memory. I was having a hard time calibrating because I knew they were trying to do what feels to me, or felt like, was an erasure or something where they're sanitizing this program so that they don't get in trouble any further than they have. So that's my hit on it. But I'm still here, and I'm still, navigating, and I still have residual programs, in my opinion, that are there. But I'm the one in control, of course, and whatever's left for signals, I think, are not half as strong as they used to be. But they were very strong. They were so strong that back in 2010, when I came back from Maui, my signals were so strong they had to have an air ranger on board. I mean, I'm not kidding. So there's a lot of me that's classified beyond classified that just doesn't get looked at anymore. And it's okay, I just keep transmuting, but they erased my whole life, and I can't get that back.
Well, so. It really is sort of a rebirth. And there was a couple of things I was going to interject. I didn't want to slow your flow, man. No, I just don't do that.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's all right.
But two things, which the discussion of signals, which there was a Rush album called Signals, and there's so much stuff, like you said, if you look beyond the veneer of whatever they're putting things out, it's really interesting, because like I said, I may go back and listen to some of these and look at some more of the lyrics, maybe a little bit more deeply now through a different kind of prism of knowledge at this point. So, but something I was going to say, there was I'm not sure if you're familiar with a band called the Dead Kennedys, and they had a song called I Am the Owl. I Am the Owl, and the lyrics had something to do with a youth leader that was ran over, and more or less it was something like, I'm trying to think the lyric, the press didn't even care why a youth leader got run over by a speeding car. It says, in 50 years or so we'll leak the truth, but by then it's only so much paper. And that's the damnable thing about humanity, is that we're so quick to forget. If you look at a video of something, or look at like World War II or World War I or whatever, and they look at it like it's literally ancient history, and it's like, that was like a blink a moment ago. I mean, for me, the concept of time is a construct, really, more of kind of a tool to kind of, for the ants to kind of know when they need to go carry the rocks. I think the people that are running the sort of programs you're dealing with are probably about as human to us as we are talking to a gorilla or a chimpanzee or something. And I'm not trying to negate their importance as a creature, but as of just the worlds of sophistication and manipulation, and people don't think about knocking over an anthill, because they're feel so far removed from it. And it's what it feels like. It feels like you were talking about how they didn't care that they were hurting you. You were chattel. Nobody. Most people riding horses is not worried about the spurs and the horse. They're just worried about getting to where they want to get. You're a vehicle. You're a donkey.
It's the technology.
Right. And
yep, you're right. And they did make great progressions. I mean, if you look and see what DARPA's been doing, DoD, DARPA, Google, Zuckerberg, all of these people, the big players, even Elon Musk, they're all interested in synthetic telepathy in the program I was subjected to and interfaced with. And it works so well. It works so well, I must say. If you're using it, and with your background in law enforcement, this is the best technology you can possibly be interfaced with. Right. It's really awesome. And even with remote viewing, we can remote view and we can see around our perimeters. They can tell you where you're heading and what's around the corner before you even get there. And that's what I mean by the program. It's really effective. It works really well. And that's why they never would put the brakes on it. But why I was a test pilot for it and why their own personnel wasn't is beyond me. That's really interesting. But I did break down the technology, and I'm the only one out there that's broken this technology down and literally put the books out and disclosed it. I haven't seen anybody do what I've done. People have talked about mind control and a lot of other things, but they have not been interfaced with the technology I was. And I really believe that my brain was hardwired for it to begin with, quite honestly. And it works really well. And it's a shame to this day when I look at it that we couldn't have done better things. Like I would have loved to have been an astronaut. If that's the case, if you're going to erase my life, well, geez, let me go into the black space program or let me do something, extraordinary with it. instead of wasting it. And that's what I hate. They wasted.
Well, and that's the thing. You could, I mean, we could get really deep in regards of, pardon the pun, and talk about, like some of the Hollow Earth aspects and all these different technologies that tie in with all these different things, and like, the space fleet that supposedly is out there and all this, and colonization of Mars. I mean, that would have been cool. I mean, like you said, if they're gonna change my world, let me be, somebody who's, repopulating Mars and doing, whatever sort of communication and negotiation with whatever is there. So, it just really seems really, I don't know.
Well,
it's
it's weaponized.
Like
the whole thing is, no, they didn't, and that's what bothered me the most. Mossbach was playing double agent with me. He was trying to pretend he was my friend and also very intimate with me, with the rest of them, but literally handling me and literally in the end stabbing me in the back. I mean, I watched him lie under oath, and I watched him turn his back on me in the courtroom, and I thought, you son of a bitch. After all this crap I've been through, and I just really, to that day, man, I'm like looking at these people. They are really just scum of the earth, in my opinion. I hate to say it. And I used to like the music of the band. I used to like Rush music. And I used to have a lot of respect for Pert. That's gone out the window. I know his dirty secret. He'll never expose it. Fine. But I know it, and to hell with it. And that's the bottom line is, he should be called out on these things that he's done. And he doesn't have the integrity to come forward. He's too scared, and his wife is handling him like you wouldn't believe. And she's part of the program and part of the criminal work, too. So, you get one, you get them all, because their inner circle is definitely their families. Their families are informed and are interactive with this program. And if they say they're not, they're lying. And that's what I can tell you. And Ashkelon's 100% involved. And Ashkelon, where Michael, that's his business, his corporation, they literally have contracts with Middle East, Israel, you name it. He's there. His hands are everywhere. D.C., military, high prominent vice presidents and presidents. He's been everywhere with this technology. So I believe they've just covered him and protected him like you wouldn't believe.
Well, and I'm sure, you see the sort of stuff that, and now, of course, I don't see it firsthand. I just see it from the internet, the sort of stuff that they're pulling off in Dubai and the things that they're doing in Dubai. And they have access. They have access to that technology. Hugely. And that's the thing. It's so funny because it's sort of like, it very much is sort of an ant colony. We're here kind of doing our little kind of rural existence, as it were, comparatively to these guys, and they're up, in a thing where they can decide more or less how long they want to live, whatever sort of body modifications and things that they want to do, and it's just it's not even, to me, they're not even human.
Yeah, it's like Elysium.
Very much
they've
so.
taken out the spiritual side of who they are. If they had a soul, spirit, consciousness, it kind of gets compromised with the program to some degree. They kind of gut you from the inside out, is what I've always said. I'm still maintained my spiritual design. I don't know how. I think it's by divine grace, but I'm still partially, I'm here. But I can tell you that particular warfare program is designed to enslave everybody on such a high scale, to interconnect you with the technology to control, manipulate your brainwave activity, so that you do what you're told, and that there's a censorship insofar as your thought process goes. You cannot think freely, like you expand in consciousness, or you're interpolating data from the spirit or the soul. Well, no, not with this program. You've got to be in confinement insofar as what they want you to be. I don't know if you ever saw THX 1138, but I refer to it often. It's another, obviously, Philip K. Dick, but it's that same concept of literally being encapsulated by a system that's controlling every thought, every action, every word through technology. And if you watch it, have you seen THX 1138?
I'm trying to think.
You haven't?
I don't think
I'll send you the link.
Do that.
Okay, well, it's disturbing. It really is. But the bottom line is what they were trying to portray is an enslavement program with technology and an interface that literally is responsible for every move you make on the chessboard here, where you have no free will and you're underground. And it's a fascinating film, but it's also very disturbing and depressing because it shows you the dark side of the technology and where they're at with it. In other words, they want it for them. They want to be like what you were saying. It's Elysium, transhumanism. We want to live forever. We want to keep ascending. We want to be, super upgraded with technology. But at the same time, they don't want certain people to have access to it, and everybody else has to either be a slave or be eradicated. I mean, this to me is the bigger scenery. I'm not even being paranoid. It's an assessment. But that's what I've seen with it. And for me, it was like, I think I would have been really interested in working with Sci-Spy. I really wanted to keep going with it, but I wasn't complying with their mind control program. And I guess that's where it just fractured, That's fine, because I cannot be mind controlled. So.
Well, this is the way I look at it, Solaris. And like I said, we're about at the end of our day. The sacred feminine is no slouch. And the thing is, the fact that you're tapped into that, you had that X factor that they didn't figure in. They, technology, at the end of the day, has a shelf life. Magic doesn't, and the soul
I
doesn't.
so agree.
You know.
Yeah, that's well said. I must say, I want to thank you for having me on tonight. It's been really, really a pleasure to be interviewed by you. So thank you for having me.
Well, like I said, it was very interesting being on the opposite side of the mic on this one, and like I said, I hope you had a good time. And if you'll hang up for 1 second after my outro, I'll say goodbye to you and handle that.
Okay.
But everybody, this is Solaris BlueRaven. Make sure to tune into her show, Hyperspace, and also Witching Hour. Make sure to check out her books, and Google this lady. There's all kinds of great information on her, and she does a lot of readings as well. So contact her about that. But I want you guys to go out and enjoy the rest of the day, and eat of all the fruit out there, and just enjoy your life, because there's a lot to enjoy. But as the sun settles and the shadows grow long, don't forget to look under your bed, in your closet, out the back hallway. You never know what may be out there. Now, don't be afraid to get a little scared, because sometimes through fear comes knowledge, and through knowledge comes freedom. So until next time, everybody, be well and take care.